Okay, we are going to get started on a drawing of a cylinder. You've already done some studies pertaining to this with a video learning about ellipses. So I'm going to get started by deciding what cylinder I'm going to draw in particular. So I'm going to draw this cylinder, and I've oriented my paper in that direction. To prepare, I also have my graphite pencils over here, a whole array of them, HB through 6B, and my ebony. I've got some blending tools that I have folded, or you might have store-bought tortillions. But if you're using paper towels like I am, make sure that you have folded these until you cannot fold them anymore. So they should be kind of pointy with some pressure behind them in order to work. If you need to sharpen your pencils, get up and do it now. I also have my handheld sharpener, and I have my graphite stick, my pointy eraser, a larger eraser, and my ruler. All right, so with my paper, oh, I almost forgot. I've got this paper towel over here so that when I start shading, that can protect my work. All right, so I'm ready to get going. I've got my paper oriented vertically, just like the cylinder I'm going to draw. So first thing I'm going to do is kind of create an underdrawing just to gauge kind of the proportions. So this will be really simple. This should also be really light. I'm doing it a little bit darker than I normally would, just because I want you guys to be able to see it on camera. So I think that might be roughly the height and width of the cylinder. So I could check those things by kind of measuring on here this width and then measuring that compared to the height from top to bottom. All right, so just eyeballing that though, I think that's pretty good. I'm going to next kind of turn this into a rough rectangle. So still pretty rough, light. I may want to check and see, okay, does it look like it's kind of lined up correctly with the paper, or is it slanting? So I'm standing up to do that so I can really see clearly what's going on. All right, now I'm going to start to think about where this ellipse shape is going to be. So it's going to obviously be up here at the top, and I want to think about how wide or tall maybe is a better way to say it is. So from the top edge to the bottom edge of the ellipse, how big is that going to be? So I can just sort of rough that in and kind of look at that. So I'm just sort of creating this oval here. So I've got kind of a rough idea of this oval. So right away, I can start to maybe shave down these extra corners. And this is starting to get more of a cylindrical shape. I'm going to also do another oval or ellipse down at the bottom. So I'm saying oval or ellipse because we haven't necessarily made sure that they're true ellipses yet, but we're at least getting in something with some curves. All right, so that curve will then replace that flat bottom that we had, and I'm not going to see this part because we've got a cardboard cylinder rather than something glass or see-through. All right, so we're getting there. Next thing I want to do is make sure that it's going to be as symmetrical as I can make it. So I'm going to draw what I like to call a line of symmetry. So you're going to try to draw that roughly in half. Again, all of this should be really, really light. at this point. All right. And the next thing I'm going to do, I want this ellipse to be accurate and symmetrical as well. So the first thing I'm going to do is draw kind of a center point on this. And when I say kind of, I'll explain. So you've already watched a video about drawing ellipses and what ellipses are. So if you recall back to the video, and you don't have to draw this part, in fact, I'll draw this on a separate sheet of paper. Right. But in that video you learned about drawing a circle inside a square, and kind of made something like this, and then we kind of drew that circle within that square. And then we essentially said, okay, now let's put that square in perspective. So if that's my horizon line and my eye level, we ended up with our square looking kind of like that. So if I've drawn that symmetrically, that would be kind of right lined up right in the center. And then we learned that when we did that, the center, this center line, ends up a little bit further than halfway up, because this front side is closer than this back side. So then when we did that, we get our ellipse shape. All right, so that's really small in there, but hopefully just refreshing your memory. So we're thinking about that being here. So I'm going to say, okay, this is going to be the center. That's the bottom. And this is roughly the top. All right, so I've got this kind of divided. I can check it. This top part is a little bit bigger than that bottom part. And what we would have these kind of going up and connecting somewhere up here. So we could even say, okay, let's say they're connecting up here. We're just kind of imagining for now. All right. So that would be what would be going on. You don't necessarily have to draw this whole part, but this is kind of what would be happening if you're kind of thinking back to that earlier video. All right, and so now the important part, and what we definitely do want to draw, is the widest part of the ellipse does need to be level. All right, so making that level, we're making sure now that this side looks to be the equal length of this side. So earlier we might not have been quite clear on where that ended. We're getting that clearer now, and hopefully getting that closer and closer to symmetrical. All right, so to make it a little bit clearer what I mean, what you don't want is kind of an ellipse that looks like that, or, you know, usually a less crazy variation of that. But that's why we made sure that we put that line through the center. All right. So again, you may not have drawn that whole triangle, and that's fine, but the important part was that you kind of had this kind of measured out, with this being flat, and then this top half being a little bit smaller than that bottom half. All right. So you may recall in the earlier video that the artist was saying, okay, most artists just kind of eyeball this. So that's what we're doing. We're basically eyeballing it with a little bit of background knowledge about why it looks the way it looks and how it should look. All right, so at this point, I'm trying to get this kind of lined up. I think that's going to be pretty precise, and so I'm starting to erase. I will erase that center line. All right, so now it's going to be just kind of my open cylinder. All right, and I'm going to have these side lines connect down to this cylinder at the bottom. Or I'm sorry, this ellipse at the bottom. So again, this widest part, we want to make sure that that lines up. So I'm just drawing this guideline and making sure that that's flat, it's parallel to the bottom of my page, it's parallel to this sort of imaginary line that I had at the top. And this curve here, we know from our video, this curve can be a little bit deeper than the curve at the top. So another way to say that would be that when we divided this up, we had this top part be a little bit smaller than this bottom part. Here, this whole thing would be a bit bigger. So this rectangle, if you will, if we were to draw that whole thing out, that would be a little bit bigger from top to bottom. So that makes this a little bit more curved and a deeper curve. All right, so even if you didn't quite follow all of that, the important thing that you should be left with is this curve is a little bit deeper than the one at the top. All right, so starting to erase the rest of these guidelines. And now is the time when it's safe to use the ruler. So if you start using the ruler too early, you might not, you'll get straight lines, but they won't necessarily be where you want them. They won't necessarily be vertical. And here we may have to make just slight adjustments, make sure that we get this where we want it. And I'm still doing it fairly lightly because in case you got it a little bit off, you want to be able to erase if your ruler was a little bit slanted, a little diagonal. Okay, so we're getting closer and closer to what hopefully will be a nice straight line, and it's all lined up. Okay, so now we've got our basic shape. It's looking pretty good. We are going to put in some kind of line for the ground, the horizon, the table, whatever you want to think of this as. So I could put it where it is in my photo, which would put it right about here. I could make it a little bit lower, so you can see in this drawing down here, we've got, oh, I'm sorry, haha. You can see in this drawing down here that the table's a little bit lower and it's kind of at an angle. So I might strike a happy medium and maybe put the table line a little bit lower. I would not suggest putting it like right in the middle of the page or maybe even right in the middle of the cylinder. It might look a little bit odd. So but I think I will make it just a little lower. So again, as you do this, you just want to be careful that you're keeping this truly horizontal and matching all of these other sort of imagined horizontal lines. Okay, at this point, you do want to check your work. Make sure you stand up, you look at it by standing up, or you hold it out at arm's length. Make sure you're really looking at it directly to catch any mistakes. final things we're going to put in here, we're going to put in a suggestion of the shadow and of the rim of the cylinder. So you want to look to see where does the shadow touch the cylinder. So you can see it's down here, it's not halfway. If you kind of think about where is that halfway, how much lower would that be? If you were to divide the half again, it's even lower than that. So really look at where that touches and look at the angle that you see and try to estimate that and capture that. Try to prevent that from curving. Mine was starting to curve there a little bit. So the sides of the cylinder are straight, and this reflects the side of the cylinder. So I got in there with my ruler. And then we are going to see a shadow coming here from, in this case, about the middle. And this, shadows definitely vary according to the light, the position of the light. And I'm going to keep these pretty parallel to one another. Okay. So I'm thinking that looks pretty good for my shadow, the cast shadow on the table. And then looking at this rim, so this is really narrow, but we're doing an open cylinder. So you get just the top of the cardboard there. So we're going to put that in to suggest that. So that's going to go on the inside. This might be a little tricky to see. Let's see if we can try to zoom in my screen. Okay, so it's a bit closer. So I'm erasing a little bit again, so I'm seeing more clearly where is this line truly, and then I'm going to draw this line, and notice how it is going to change a little bit, getting a little bit kind of narrower as we move back, so it just about disappears toward the back. So this definitely requires that skinny eraser and that well-sharpened pencil. So here we want to make sure as we move back, it may kind of basically is going to look almost like one line, but there is kind of a top and a bottom. This is going to be hard to see at this point, but I know it's there, and eventually when I shade that, we'll see it a little bit more because this edge will kind of be light, and then we've got the shadow. All right. Okay, we have a few other details going on in this. I don't know, though, that we're going to do all the details with this study. So we will say there's going to be a shadow in here, but it's not a hard edge, so I think we'll leave that out for now. All right, so that's about what we're going to do. That's about where we're going to end this, and then we'll have another video for the shading. Please do not make your lines super dark at this point. So they should be still pretty light. I do have a line down here for the shadow, so just want to make sure you can actually see that, but you should not make them darker. Don't feel the need to go over these lines and make them really heavy. we are going to try to make those lines basically disappear, and instead you'll just see an edge. You'll just see an edge in the same way that when we did our value scale, hopefully you really see an edge, but you don't really see a line.